So my name is Jeffrey Levine. I'm the chairperson of the Jewish National Fund. You notice I said chairperson. I'm very woke. My wife, Randy, and I are proud members of the World Chairman's Council. After I introduce our esteemed speaker, we're going to have a wonderful interview for a few minutes of Stephen Shalowitz, a member of the New York board and the voice of JNF Israel Cast podcast, will conduct the interview with our special guests. 2 weeks ago, Ambassador Asaf Zamir began his tenure as Consul General of Israel of New York, representing the state of Israel in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Delaware. This part upsets me. Born in 1980, I have children almost this old. Ambassador Zamir was raised in Florida before returning to Israel to finish his schooling. Who knew? A progressive from Florida. After completing his service in the Israel Defense Forces as part of the Central Control Unit in the Israeli Air Force, he earned a law degree at Tel Aviv University. Who knew? Brave and smart. In 2008, as part of Rov Hayer, majority of the city, he co-founded, Ambassador Zamir was elected deputy mayor of the Tel Aviv City Council. Try getting elected in Israel. It's very difficult, elected to anything. Re-elected in 2013, he was responsible for the city's education system, implementing programs related to affordable housing, public transportation, education, equality, civil rights for minorities, and the refugee community, as well as being an advocate for the LGBTQ community in Tel Aviv-Yafo. We need you here. Ambassador Zamir also chaired the board of Yehoshua Rabinovich Foundation for the Arts, and in 2011 established the Mikpadim movement aimed at motivating youth to enroll as party members to all political parties in Israel. In April 2019 elections, Ambassador Zamir entered national Israeli politics as part of the Blue and White Party led by Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid. With the formation of the National Unity Government in May 1920, for the moment, he was appointed, that was humorous, he was appointed Minister of Tourism. We have 5 elections so far? Okay. Later that year, he resigned and called for new elections, playing a key role in the effort to form the most diverse government in the history of Israel. Ambassador Zamir is married to Maya Wertheimer, who I understand is a distant relative of our very own Ben Gutman's family, and is an actress. We'll have to tell us more about that. We all watch Fauda and so on. Okay. Together, they have one daughter, Asiya. I learned it's spelled A-S-I-A, very hard to pronounce in English when it's his Hebrew name. So please welcome Asaf and Stephen. Where are you?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you. And thanks.
Always sounds amazing in English. I can hear it all day. My bio in English. In Hebrew, it sounds sounds less. Sarasota.
Anyway, well, listen, welcome, and thanks so much for giving personally me the opportunity to speak with new Consul General Asaf. And I have to say, it's always good to speak to a fellow landsman, because beforehand I found out that his mother is originally from Chicago, and I'm a 3rd-generation Chicagoan. So anyone with Midwestern roots is actually very good in my book. So anyway, so great to meet you. And we're going to be chatting for just about 10 to 15 minutes or so. And, you know, a number of bases to cover, really. And first, welcome once again to New York and to your new role. And I really wanted to start out by asking you to talk a little bit about the message that you have for the American Jewish community, because, I mean, it's very clear that all of us in the room are real big Israel supporters. We can see it in a lot of the JNF projects. The Galilee Culinary Institute, support of Israel baseball. I'm guessing you're a baseball fan, having grown up a little bit in the United States, or, you know, the new Zionist village in Beersheba. You're not a baseball fan. Do you follow Israel baseball, by the way?
Not any baseball. I follow basketball.
Okay, there you go. Well, that's still pretty much of an American sport. But the point being is that, you know, all of us are real cheerleaders for Israel. And so my question really to you is Consul General, what's really the message that you want to share with the American Jewish community on how they can help build, foster, engage with Israel, not only for people like us, that are very much already involved, but for those that aren't really engaged with Israel already?
Okay. Well, hello everyone. Again, very honored to be here. Thank you for taking the time to meet this evening. I have a few messages coming over. I have acknowledged that we have many cheerleaders in this country, and I think that I want to make sure on the Israeli side that we as a team are playing good enough to deserve these cheers. I don't come from diplomacy. I come from politics, unlike some of my predecessors. I'll try to be as least political as possible this evening. I will say that growing up here, not just growing up here, I was up until 2 years ago, I was an American citizen. I had dual citizenship, which I had to give up when I was elected for parliament for the first time, because there's a law in Israel where you can't have both. But having that dual citizenship, I also felt I had a sense of dual identity. And in that aspect, I could be an honest broker, maybe to both sides. Because it's not just coming over here and telling Americans about Israel and demanding things in the name of Israel. It's also the way I see my job. It's also representing American Jewry towards Israel and towards the Israeli government. And it's a relationship. And a relationship must have two sides to it. And it needs to be fostered from both sides. And I think that in the past few years, there has been, on our part, for political domestic reasons, a disconnect between Israel and Israelis and American Jewry. And I think that my major message is that I think we have a new administration here, we have a new administration in Israel, and a broader understanding of that gap and its consequences. And I think that one of my jobs will be to try and close that gap and renew and reconnect between the Israeli Jews and the American Jews, and more specifically, to make sure we do everything in our power that all Jews in America have an identity towards Israel, and that all Jews in America feel that Israel regards them as Jews and has a relationship with them. And if to be specific, more so with the younger generation, which I meet, I try as often as possible, and in which I hear, with which I hear a larger disconnect, sometimes just out of aznacha, out of neglect. When you neglect, it's not ignorance. Ignorance is something else I talk about a lot, and we can talk about this evening. But the neglect of building that relationship generates a younger generation that, not from a bad place, just doesn't really feel any connection, doesn't really feel it has the tools to understand why Israel cannot exist without all Jews in the world, and why us as a Jewish people cannot exist without a strong Israel. And so that's the main thing.
I read in an interview that you said, and I'm quoting here, "I'm from Tel Aviv Yafo, one of the most diverse cities in Israel, and I was appointed to this position by the most diverse government in Israeli history. It's only natural for me to work with diverse communities," unquote. And I'm just wondering, in light of the recent study that was done on anti-Semitism, the horrific state of anti-Semitism here in the United States and around the world, how do you plan to engage with those voices and those communities that, dare I say, are not Israel supporters?
First of all, I'm going to use this excuse a few times, the least possible, but a few times this evening, and say this is my second week.
Okay.
I haven't got.
Asaf, this is what we call your honeymoon period.
This is my honeymoon period. I don't have answers for everything to myself, nonetheless to you, about how and what is effective. I'm at a point where I'm starting to truly understand the problems, and then the priorities of these problems, and then thinking about how to deal with them. But I will say this. There's a large group of people in the United States, Jews and non-Jews, that overwhelmingly support Israel and will continue to support Israel. But there is a growing group, very diverse in its motives, reasons, and whatnot, that are not. And it's what I believe is the largest group that's ever been in my years in the United States. Okay, and these groups are motivated sometimes for political reasons, sometimes with legitimate criticism. I made a career in Israel criticizing governments in Israel. I think it's super legitimate to criticize any government. But I do see certain areas where the line has been crossed between the legitimacy of criticizing and using that to actually service our enemies and saying or undermining Israel's legitimacy or its right to exist. And then from Israel to Judaism. And I came back, I was in Pittsburgh yesterday for the 3rd annual ceremony of Tree of Life. And I talked about that there, not in the ceremony, but with people, that line is a very thin line. And I think when trying to approach people that are the most critical and explaining the complexity and trying to showcase it differently is something that we do not have the luxury to not do. And there are amazing things happening in Israel, and there are complex things happening in Israel. And I believe that if I'll have the opportunity, I'll be able to convince differently. And I think we have, in some areas, a messaging problem. And again, it's a thin line between what I said and apologizing, which I don't plan on doing, and I don't think we should. But there was a piece, an interview. They interviewed Ben and Jerry a week or two ago, and there was a moment there where they asked them why they haven't stopped selling ice cream in Texas. And you saw on his face that was a second where the culture that we live in right now, where everything is either black or white, there's cancel culture all over, and if you're not on, you can have one opinion, it's bundled with a bunch of other opinions, and if you break away on one issue, you're illegitimate. That can't work. It's shallow, it's very aggressive, and it's not fair. Okay, and I think that question at that moment when they asked Ben and Jerry, it showed that, and I wish to go down that line and explain the difference through that of criticizing. I'm sure I'm sure you all as Americans have things that you think should be done differently in the United States. And I'm sure there are very, very, very critical people of Israel that think there are things that should be done here differently. They would never in a billion years accept the idea of boycotting all of the United States because of that. There would be a line drawn that you wouldn't allow pass. And for some reason, it depends on who. The reason differs from person to person. That line in Israel is a legitimate line. It's legitimate to cross that line. And we know who's saying it. We know where they're saying it. And I plan on trying to give people the tools to deal with that in those specific areas. I'll meet everyone that wants to talk about it. I think we have a big problem on campuses all over the United States. And I think that young people are, where's Russell? Okay. He gave an amazing example for that in our meeting, in our pre-meeting. I don't remember what it was right now because I'm excited, but it was young people coming and being intimidated to say what they believe. And Israel is all of ours. It's part of our history. It's part of our family. It's part of our identity. It's part of a Jewish person's identity. And reaching a point where you're not allowed to state that on campus if you want to be pro-climate is making young people intimidated. And that's another place, you asked where, that I think we should focus.
Right. That's actually a nice jumping off point to talk about Zionism, because Jewish National Fund has launched a whole year-long campaign called Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. Again, it's a year-long campaign, and really, as the name suggests, it's about reclaiming the word Zionism, showing its beauty, its inspiration, its inclusivity. And so really in that spirit, I'm just wondering, what's your definition of Zionism, and what does Zionism mean to Asaf?
My definition of Zionism, first of all, I've done a few of these receptions. I've never been asked that question, not in Hebrew, let alone in English. So I'll say my answer, but I reserve the right to maybe change it in a few months. Reshape it.
Asaf, this is your honeymoon period,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So anyway, so we
just
have
want to
to
remind everyone that. That's all. It's made out of two things. It is the eternal right of the Jewish people to exist and to exist in Israel, and to define that to define themselves in Israel. It is the right of Israel to exist as the Jewish state, and it is our obligation. This is also Zionism, to make sure every day we're doing everything we can to make it justified, to make it the best country in the world, the fairest country in the world, the most moral country in the world. It's that together, doesn't it? Okay, and we have, and I know I'm gonna make a few people in the audience mad, but it's better off you get to know me now and not later, because we're gonna have a few years to live together. Israel, and a lot of people define Israel, Zionism, right, as the right to have the Jewish and democratic state. And the Jewish and democratic state is something that has to be an ongoing process. It can never fully exist together. It can never fully exist together. And it is the decisions we make every day when these two things clash that justify our right to keep fighting for Zionism. And when we do that, then people, it's harder to attack us on a moral high ground. It's harder to attack us on a historical high ground. But if we walk around saying we have an eternal right, and that's that, and it's done, and we have a paper written on it, and it's forever, and no one can challenge that, then in today's atmosphere and political discourse, sometimes it's not enough. We have to keep working on trying to be our best all the time. We don't have to succeed, but we have to be trying all the time to be just and to be good. And we don't always do that. And when we don't do that, we can't expect everyone to give us a blank check forever. And we can't expect young people 3 generations from now to understand why they need to fight for that. You need to give them justification all the time.
So it's very much of a work in progress, is what you're saying.
I think it always will be.
Right. Well, listen, Jeff had invoked your wife, of course, Maya Wertheimer, and of course, all of us are looking forward to welcoming her here in New York and to meeting her. And, you know, she comes from the acting world. You come from the political world. These are two very different, I was going to say, they're two very different worlds, but there are actually many similarities because actors have to politic with the director, the producer, but also politicians have to do a lot of acting. So Jeff, I was actually going there. So my question to you is, what's the one piece of advice you've ever given her on politicking? And what's the one piece of advice she's ever given you on acting?
I don't know. I'm sure every married man in this room knows you don't give advice to your wife about anything. That's why would you even try? I mean, shut up, make it through today, and make sure tomorrow is still fine, and that's it. Okay? But it's similar because they're both public, and because you interact with the crowd, and because you can influence, and it comes with a certain responsibility. It's not the same where my work has boundaries and a certain responsibility that hers doesn't. And we've had very big, because she's a kind of comedian, actress, influencer, millennial, even what's younger than millennial? What's that? She's that. And she's that. And she does stuff which are funny and amazing for her career, and some people love it, but I could never do them. So it's for the people looking at us, it's interesting. For me, it's very hard. So she's not here. She's only coming in a month, and she said, "Go do your serious work before I come and kind of
Shake things up.
mess things up and embarrass you and all that. And do your dinners and your receptions and make sure everyone understands you're okay, and then I'll come." And when I was offered this position, which I think is a huge honor and with great responsibilities, then I took a few days to think about it, and then I called with her, obviously, and I called Minister of Foreign Affairs Yair Lapid back to tell him that I will do it. And he said, "Is Maya next to you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Give me the phone." And he said, I'm pretty sure Asaf will be okay. I'm not sure the New Yorkers are ready for you. So, good luck to them." Yeah.
Oh, how great. Well, again, we're really looking forward to meeting her and Asia.
Thank
we got
you.
that pronunciation correct.
She's 20 months old. She's become the biggest star in the house.
All right.
Really,
I can imagine. You're living with two starlets there in the house.
I am.
Right.
It's very hard.
So
it's really hard. It's really tiring.
Yeah,
I'm very tired.
I can imagine. Well, we'll get your sleep now, right? This is the easier part. Once they come in, that's going to be the challenge. I'm just really curious because I spoke to a few people during the reception, and some had said that they had been to Israel already. And I'm just really wondering, a show of hands, who's been to Israel, like, let's say in the last 6 or 8 months? So we can count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, and Ariel's been twice. So, and Russell's been 12 million times already, I think. So, so clearly everyone in the room has not been back to Israel. We're all really, really hoping to get back really quickly. And, of course, having been the Minister of Tourism, we would have to ask, I never like to ask people their favorite anything because I don't think they're do you have a favorite spot in Israel? Because I was going to ask you, actually. See, that's why I don't like to ask those kinds of questions. We know what your favorite spot is. It's Arad, of course, and your new racetrack. But I was going to ask you sort of what's the one place that you would hope and suggest that people visit or do or experience when they go back to Israel now, whether it's their first time or their 12 millionth time, for example?
No, that's too hard a question because there's but honestly, because
first just of all, off the top of your head,
for me, look, Jerusalem is the most important place in the world. For me, the best ambassador of Israel in the world is Tel Aviv. It really is. When I talk about getting it done right, and all of Israel is a wonder, what the Israeli people have built with you together in the past 73 years. It's a wonder. I look at it sometimes, it's amazing. It was such a small country we don't have natural resources, and we built something truly amazing. And Maya, my wife, you mentioned, grew up in the north in Kfar Vradim, and the Galil is part of her family's heritage. And I was deputy mayor of Tel Aviv for 10 years. I'm fourth generation Tel Avivian. My great-grandfather was Meir Dizengoff's chief of police. And I'm ninth generation Israeli. Goes back to Jerusalem and Tzfat. And my favorite spot outside of Tel Aviv, you won't relate to this, but it is Eilat. I love Eilat. Me and Maya got married in Eilat. Yes, because the Red Sea is amazing and the mountains are phenomenal and the air is dry and I love it. And people there are calmer and it's very nice. But Tel Aviv is essentially, in the good ways, it's our New York because it's home to everyone, but honestly, to everyone. Everyone can feel at home, and there are seculars and religious people, and there are Jews and Muslims and Christians. There is the largest Eritrean refugee community. There is the largest LGBTQ community in the world. There is a senior citizen community, which is smiling their way toward their third part of their life in the cultural center of Israel. Really, the cultural center has more names, streets named after people of the arts and culture than any other city. And it is really phenomenal. And when I've been hosting groups for every Jewish organization. I did. I'm not going to go into politics here, okay? But I have done 100 Michael Miller dinners, JCRC, in Tel Aviv with young congressmen and state senators and people that came to Israel, and I was in charge of the Tel Aviv night, and they did 2 days there, and it's hard to hate Israel after that. It really is. So that for me is very important. But this is the last thing that's important for me to say. Tel Aviv is great, and it's pretty rich, and it's doing great. But if I refer back to Israel, all of it needing to be this Medinat Mofet, Chevrat Mofet, okay? Then we need to develop the more challenging areas. And I saw Nisan Ben Chamo here when I arrived, and the things that he's trying to do in Arad. And Arad is a very, very hard place to develop. And it is those areas that if we succeed in developing, we are one step closer to what I talked about, to a country that has smaller social gaps, inequality in education, and that, sorry to say it this way, it's easier to sell to the world and to show to the world. I'm a big Israeli patriot. I really think it's one of the greatest countries in the world. But there's always a lot of work to do. And I know that lots of it's being done by all the people here. So I want to say thank you to you. And I want to say that I'm very happy to start my tenure. And then my door, like the principal in my school said, my door is always open for you to convey a message to Israel or to help in anything or to try to think together, because I do believe it's a two-way partnership that can't exist otherwise.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Thank you so much and welcome once again.
Is it? So Asaf, Russell Robinson, the Chief Executive Officer, and I want to thank you for allowing us to welcome you to New York. And I want to take a little bit of what you ended with about our story. So we're going to give you a gift. By the way, we sealed it so that the money, we don't have to collect. But I have to tell you the story because it talks about Tel Aviv. Because 121 years ago, a man who died at the age of 44, Theodor Herzl, fought for the establishment of a fund called the Jewish National Fund. Not to talk about Israel as our ancestral soil, so let's just go there, but repurchasing the land of Israel, acre by acre. And 107 or 8 years ago, in the city in which you talk about that has the multitude of cultures and people, restaurants, great restaurants. There's one in Beersheba and Akko I'll tell you about.
There's one in
All right.
What does that mean about a city?
Numbers don't matter. But 108 years ago, 65 families went to a top of a hilltop and purchased a lot in a dust, nothing community called Tel Aviv. And those 65 families have built everything in which you were the leadership of, which my daughter always upset because I talk only about the Negev and Galil, and she's a Tel Avivian. And she says, sometimes, Dad, you can mention Tel Aviv, but when you talk about the mayor of Arad, and you talk about 60% of the land of Israel and 17% of the land of Israel in the Galil, and you talk about Israel as the nation of the Jewish people, and we were talking about it earlier, our opportunity, our responsibility, and our really right to participate in this nation under creation that Israel brought a person to become ambassador in the Consul General here in New York, who represents the generation of tomorrow, that has a daughter who's taken over the house because, and she will. I will give you plenty of lessons about, right, daughters. That you represent the generation of tomorrow. You come here not talking about the history, about being a general, and I fought in the war and I was in Entebbe, all important stuff. You're talking about the opportunity for a conversation between us, a conversation between us. Our young leadership, our JNF future, our fastest growing part of our donor demographic, the conversation that they're going to have about common values, about shared destinies, is what the Jewish National Fund story is about. It's about what we're building in Beersheba and the Zionist village. It is not about a village. If you go onto our website, there is a multitude of buildings, but the first words are, we're building a new conversation. In tomorrow's conversation, you are bringing a flag and planting it here. And I have to say, the first of the generation of tomorrow, the generation of our conversation, of our talking about each other and our strength that we give to each other. And I thank you for allowing us to thank you for welcoming you to New York. There's no breaking.
It's a delivery guy or something. First of all, thank you very much. One serious thing and one joke. I was talking a lot about the need and the different messaging differently. If you all feel, or any of you, that you have a way to broaden my horizons or make me understand the path we should go to, or contribute in any way, I'd love for you to tell me. I'm looking for partners. The second thing, just because you told this story, is the 66 families that established Tel Aviv, and they stood on the beach, on a hill on the beach, and they bought the whole place, and they divided it to 66 lots. And when you divide a whole area to 66 lots, some lots are central, and some are on the sides, and some are best location, prime location, whatnot. And they said, how will we divide them? How will we decide? And they held a raffle. And they took 66 seashells and put a number on each seashell from 1 to 66. And there was one lot, the best lot in Tel Aviv, the best lot. It was on what is now Herzl and Chadam Street in front of Kol Shalom. This was the best lot. And they said, how will we do it? We'll do a raffle. And then one of the people that organized the raffle said, he said, I will conduct the raffle. And he won the best lot. So that's the story of Tel Aviv. Thank you very, very much, guys.